One of the nice things about mobile apps is the way they can integrate data together, and that's a big theme. Data is one thing, but if we can integrate data and provide value to the user, we're actually providing information to the user. And many times that's our ultimate goal. So some of the data might come from the phone itself, like the camera, the GPS location, the accelerometer, information about the user, other things like that. Other data might come from somewhere else, like the internet. So in our current application, if I choose Find Specimen, we know that I can type in anything that I want and I'm going to get back the same two predictable results. So I type in anything and then I hit search and I'm always going to get a red bud and a pawpaw, no matter what I typed in. Okay, and we know that that's a bit limited information. Now what I want to do is I want to actually return something that is tells the user something about what the user entered. So if we see here, if I go to plantplaces.com/pearl/mobile/viewplantsjson.pl question mark common equals redbud, we'll see that we start off with plants and then a colon and then an open square bracket and then a set of rows that begin with an open curly and close with a closed curly and a comma. Within this, we'll see a name and a value, a name and a value, a name and a value, a name and a value. And that pattern will continue. So this is an example of a service that we can engage with to provide value to the user, provide data to the user. So this is what comes back when I put in redbud. If I put in pawpaw, we'll notice that I get back a different result, and a result that's specific to pawpaw. It's going to tell me Asemina triloba, common name is common pawpaw. If I type in maple, I'll get a set of results that are specific to maple. They're maple trees. So this is a case where I can put in some search data and get some data back. Now, we want to understand how to connect with this, but first of all, we have to understand what is data, what is a network, what is the history. If we start with the inception of mobile phones, oftentimes you hear these terms like 3G and 4G and 4G LTE. We want to understand what it all means. Now, when was the first mobile phone invented? It really depends on how you define a mobile phone. If you go back to the 40s and even in the 60s, there were some attempts at mobile phones that aren't nearly as rich in experience as what we have today. So if you think back even to the 70s, and I can think to when I was a child in the 80s, we had citizens band radios where you'd have about a 20 channel radio in your car, and pretty much everybody tuned to channel 19. So a lot of times if you went on a road trip, you would keep it tuned on this channel 19, and people would alert you that, hey, there's a speed trap up ahead, watch your speed. And a lot of times if you were doing a road trip, that's how you could keep an eye on speeding tickets. It was kind of like a community, almost like a community radio station. The broadcast typically didn't go that far. So from your CB radio, you would generally hear people roughly in the vicinity of where you were driving. Not much further outside of that. So usually just the cars and trucks that were around you. So if we take this and we attach a phone to it, we basically get the first generations of mobile phone service, which is phones that operated on a shared frequency. There was not much compression involved, so there was a real limit to the amount of phones, a lot of phone calls that could happen simultaneously, because typically you would get one frequency. There was no really good way to split up that frequency and allow multiple users to use the phone simultaneously. That's what we'll call scalability. Taking one pipe or one avenue that's a fixed width and being able to fit more water in it or more cars in it or whatever the case may be. That's what we call scalability. And if you think of today where everybody has a mobile phone just about, we have to really get good at this scalability. So the first real cellular phones started to come out. We will call them 1G. And this is old school cellular, where you would be sending an analog signal over the waves, over the wavelengths, And it was better than the 0G. This was the first time you could truly have many people using a cellular phone simultaneously, using cellular frequencies simultaneously. But the quality was a bit spotty, and also the compression was not nearly what we have today. So one phone call would take up a whole lot of bandwidth, basically. This is what we called cellular. This is the first time we really called it cellular phone service. In the 90s, when I was in college, I worked at Elder Beerman for a while selling pagers, and then at Radio Shack selling cellular phones. And this is in the day of cellular. Now, if you look at this phone and many phones like it at the time, they were quite large. And a lot of that is the battery. Uh, First of all, the phones were not as efficient. We were used to gadgets being big. And as a matter of fact, many times gadgets were made to be big because they looked more impressive that way for some reason. So many times, if you saw something that was too small, it didn't look realistic. So the other thing is that you needed a bit of a stronger signal because, frankly, there weren't nearly as many cellular towers as we have today. So it had to spend a lot of energy transmitting and receiving calls from these cellular towers. And that's all they received. If you look at the display here, you just see a phone number. There's really not much of a display. There's some hard buttons and then maybe what about a 9-digit display on the top. So really they were just voice calls. There wasn't this whole idea that you could send data and use apps and things like that. The other trick is they used common radio frequencies that were very easy to pick up on. Again, going back to my days working at Radio Shack, we sold police scanners. Back in up till about '99 at least, you could get a police scanner and listen into police officers talking on the radios in their cars. That was a fairly frequent thing to do. I mean, not frequent, but it was definitely something that you could do. It was perfectly legal in most jurisdictions. You just had to know what frequencies they would use. So that was common. I even remember living downtown for a while, and I had a police scanner. So you could just hear the calls that would come across. Probably not the kind of thing you wanted to do right before you go to bed, as my dad did several times. Listen to the police scanner and then scare yourself to death. But nonetheless, that was, before we had the internet, those are the kind of things you did to entertain yourself, listen to the police scanner. Well, you could take this police scanner and there were certain frequencies that cordless phones would use. So cordless phone is like a phone within your own home that connects to basically a base station that then connects to the wired line service that you have. So it was honestly pretty easy to listen into your neighbor's calls. I know that sounds kind of freaky, but working at Radio Shack and selling police scanners, I know that's what a lot of people did in the 90s. You could also listen into cellular calls, and somebody did this in 1997 in a rather infamous case on what was then Congressman John Boehner's phone call, now Speaker John Boehner. And that caused a lot of news that somebody was able to basically listen into his call, listen into a call he was making, and I believe actually record it. So that was 1G. As cell phones gained in popularity, we needed something higher quality and more scalable. So again, given that we can't change the laws of physics and the number of waves that are out there, the number of frequencies that are out there, we have to be able to take those same frequencies and fit more users onto them. So we came out with the second generation, which was digital. You started hearing about this in the early 90s. I remember I first heard about it around 95, 96 when I was in college. It was, well, cellular service is going to get replaced with digital service. And even when I was selling phones at Radio Shack, somebody asked me, what's going to happen when we run out of cellular frequencies? And my response is, well, we'll go digital then, with the thought that it was kind of something far off. With digital, instead of an analog signal going across, you are actually sending a series of zeros and ones, which for one offers better compression. Okay, offers a lot better compression. And for two, offers better quality because if you happen to lose a couple packets, it's not a big deal. You can still make out what the rest are. So 2G came along, and Cincinnati was actually one of the first markets to get 2D 2G digital service. Around 97, and I remember my father got me a digital phone as a graduation gift right about the first month they came out. So that would have been May of 97. And I had a Sony phone that, and I think I held on to that thing for probably 5 or 6 years. I honestly got one of the first ever phones that was digital and kept it for until they would no longer service it. The company I was with GTE, which was bought out by VoiceStream and then T-Mobile. And I kept that phone until T-Mobile would no longer allow me to use it. So then switched it in around that time. So, so those were digital phones. Still, they were very focused on voice calls. It was the first time you could send a text message. Um, I honestly don't ever remember using a text service on my first digital phone. I do remember that you had a monthly service fee, um, without data, just voice. A monthly service fee was about $35, which honestly, if you take the data component out of your phone service now, that's about what the voice component usually is, somewhere in that $35 to $50 range. But then every minute you spoke was 25 cents. So, you figure if you had a 30-minute call for work, it would very quickly get very expensive. So you had to keep an eye on that. So those were the first 2G phones. Then data started to become bigger and bigger as we got more text messages and smarter phones. And so we went to 3G mobile broadband, which was able to scale enough that you could stream radio and television. So back on 2G digital, you didn't really have the fancy kind of screens that we have now. They were basically monochrome screens that could just show text. With 3G, you started to get more advanced screens that could show more information. And then finally, we have the cream of the crop right now, which is 4G, which is much faster than 3G, 10 times faster. What's interesting is that it's an all IP network. We'll talk about TCP/IP in our next lecture, and phone calls are treated as streaming audio. So basically, everything is treated as data. Phone calls are just like if you were to, well, like this video, for instance, I'm recording it on my laptop and I'll upload it to YouTube. That's basically the same way that a phone would, that a network will handle a voice call now. Okay, so mobile phones, we went from the big phones of the 70s, when few people had them, into the 80s. The phones got a little bit smaller, very limited battery life, even though the batteries were huge, very limited memory, and very expensive. In '89, we really had the first of the smaller phones, the first of the handheld phones. And then in '97, we got things that were much more hand-holdable, much more compact. Okay, so into the 90s then, phones became smart. A lot of people tend to think that the iPhone was the first smartphone, but actually it was not. BlackBerry used to be synonymous with smartphone. It used to be where people now will say iPhone or something like that. It used to be BlackBerry. So, grab your BlackBerry, or this is my BlackBerry time, or, that even as recently as maybe 5 years ago, BlackBerry and smartphone were synonymous. In 2006, Nokia came out with the N95, which is very much like what we currently think of as a smartphone, something with a large screen and a touch screen and with apps. Nokia ran a very pure Java mobile development environment. BlackBerry ran one that was fairly pure with a few customizations. Android is a Java environment with a lot of proprietary extensions, and iPhone is entirely proprietary. So it's a bit interesting, and to be honest with you, a bit unfortunate that the very open systems, especially of Nokia, really did not take off. With truly open Java Mobile, J2ME, you could write an app on a Nokia and run it on a BlackBerry as well. So you had different operating systems, different manufacturers. You could run one app on both. And great concept, especially good for developers like us because that's less rewriting that we have to do. Unfortunately, in the end, those platforms didn't really take off as the others have. So, programming languages, I talked a lot about this. Nokia was the most pure. Symbian is the operating system, and they had a pure Java ME, Java mobile environment. BlackBerry had extensions. Android is a Java environment, but it compiles to Dalvik, a special virtual machine. iPhone has a very controlled environment, runs Objective-C, and then Windows Phone is C#, which is Windows development, Microsoft's development environment. Now, it is a bit tricky if you think I want to write a mobile app and I want to support the top 3 platforms. As it is now, you have to write a completely different program 3 times if you're going to support the top 3 platforms. That's not really good for us as developers because we waste a lot of our time doing the same things. I've taken great strides to make the search by color with Plant Places Mobile very, very particular. I'll see if I can load it here. If you take a picture of a flower and it has the background is either the sky or the background is leafy material or green material, the search by color will ignore the sky or the leafy material in the background and focus only on the color. That takes a lot of work. And a lot of people ask me, when are you going to come out with an iPhone version? And there's a real decision here. Do you want to do a good job 1 time or a mediocre job 2 times? And that's a very real consideration that you have to think about when you're doing a mobile app. The more devices you support, the more you're going to be doing the same thing. When you could, if you only supported 1 device, you could do just 1 thing and do it well. And so my decision was to do that. Do 1 platform and focus on that 1 platform, do it well. So it's like we often say in mobile programming or in any kind of programming, there you have 3 things: lots of functionality, good quality, and minimum time. Okay, lots of functionality, good quality, and a short time. Pick any 2. You can only have 2. You can only do a quality job with a lot of functionality if you have unlimited time. You can only do you can only do a lot of functions with little time if you sacrifice quality. So there's a trade-off there. So what I mean by that, if you look at this picture, you'll see that as a percentage, the vast majority of the colors on this picture are blue. And if I click this picture, let's watch what gets indexed here. This is on an emulator, of course. It's going to take a bit more time than what on a device. You see that all of the blues got indexed, but now watch this. I'm going to choose Menu, and I'm going to go to Preferences, and that's off screen from this recording. And I'm going to click a box to turn a filter on. Okay, I'm going to say Filter Colors, and now I'm going to go back, and this is on a preference screen. I'm going to go back again. I have to close the screen, reopen it. And watch what happens when I have the filter on. Okay, search by color. This requires a lot of what we'll call threads, as we've seen before. It requires a lot of threading to go through this process because the phone is actually doing multiple things at once. And we'll go through that as soon as we see some results here. It's a little tricky trying to select here how it interprets a mouse click. There we go. I think we got it now. And what you see now with the filter on, take a look. It's focusing on those mauve, pink, and whitish colors that we see within this flower. It's completely ignoring the blue behind it. So that's a bit tricky. It requires a lot of threading to go on because it has to know what colors to look for and what colors to ignore. And this is why I say, do it a good job 1 time or do a mediocre job twice. It's a real trade-off that you have to consider. So that's a bit of history on mobile phones and the different generations of mobile phones. I'll go ahead and stop this recording now. In our next recording, we're going to look more generally at what networking is and how we can use networking on our phones. So, recap. We started with the 0 generation, which, we didn't really have generations back then. Then we had the first generation, which we consider cellular. and then we moved to digital cellular, then data took over in the third generation, and then in the fourth generation we had what we call a native IP network. We'll talk more about that as we get into networking. So next presentation we're going to talk about networking. Thank you.